Hello, everyone. You are watching Inside the Americas. Coming up, new emergency laws in Canada help reopen the Ambassador Bridge, but it hasn't stopped the protests yet. A closer look at reaction across the country with Peter O'Brien on the way. Then the dramatic downfall of the former president of Honduras, arrested following a U.S. extradition request on drug charges just weeks after he left office. And you'll meet some of the growing number of French tech developers going west to try and strike video game gold. I'm Jeannie Godula. Canada is set to ease entry restrictions on international travelers as long as they're vaccinated. Starting February 28th, visitors from abroad can get into Canada with a rapid antigen test instead of a PCR. That announcement comes as trucker-led protesters occupying the capital, Ottawa, show no sign of backing down. There is one bright spot for the government, though, as Luke Schrago explains.
An end to a border blockade in Canada, with this Alberta road now open to traffic and others following, as police move on the final remaining protesters. The end of the weekend saw a major route linking the town of Windsor with Detroit in the United States reopened too. It handles a quarter of trade between both nations. In capital Ottawa, it's a different story, however, with demonstrating truckers occupying roads in the city centre for nearly 3 weeks, demanding an end to vaccinations needed to cross the border along with other health measures, and expressing substantial anger with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government.
There's lots of dirty games going on. I hope that we can turn it around, because it's insane what they are doing. They are not representing the Canadians anymore. And they completely forgot the purpose, what they are there for. Working for the people, not against us.
Tuesday saw Ottawa's chief of police step down amid serious criticism over his handling of the crisis. Seeking headway and to give authorities a freer hand, Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act, becoming the second Canadian leader in history to do so. Amid heated debate in Parliament, he justified his position.
These measures must be and will be compliant with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We will always defend the rights of Canadians to peaceful assembly and to freedom of expression, but these blockades need to end.
That may be harder than thought, with other Canadian provinces now demanding restrictions end, in particular the vaccine pass. This as the federal government ends the need for a PCR to enter the country.
For more now on the situation in Canada, I'm joined on the set by Peter O'Brien. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Jeannie.
You have been sifting through mountains of reaction to this state of emergency and the protests in Canada, and there's certainly been tons of it, both on social media and more traditional media.
Yeah, we're talking about a leader of a minority government who's imposed emergency powers in really peacetime. So, of course, you're going to get people on the internet who are comparing him to Hitler. But let's take a deep breath for a second and let's read the papers rather than looking straight at the internet. After Trudeau's decision, the Globe and Mail's editorial was actually somewhat sympathetic. It said the blockades were not legal protests, but a threat to the rule of law and democratic government itself. So the Globe's decided that the emergency powers are, in fact, could be justified if they're used with limited scope and time frame. But that's about where support for Trudeau in Canadian papers ends. The National Post's columnists question why the emergency measures are even necessary, given that other blockades were stopped without it. Greg Taylor said that in the province of Ottawa, well, they already had the power to deal with the blockade because they already had provincial emergency powers. But instead, leaders, national, provincial, just haven't put police powers to good use. Government officials, though, say it's not about providing more police muscle necessarily, as much as it is stripping the protests of their financial backing by doing things like bank account freezes. But the National Post's writers are very wary of this. Chris Selly, for instance, calls it a plausible solution, but says it's draconian and that it sets a dangerous precedent. And while John Iveson hopes the measures will finally put an end to the blockade, well, he fears that stripping the bank accounts, things like this, will fan the flames of sedition rather than snuff them out.
Okay, Peter, that's what the two main traditional papers have had to say. What about the tabloids?
Well, the Sun didn't mince its words. It called Trudeau a bad actor. Their editorial says he just wants more division and more hostility, and it was his incompetence that made such an extreme measure necessary. The Metro Metroland Media's 6 papers. They carried the editorial "A Last Resort of and a Failure of Leadership," again saying that there were already adequate laws in place to deal with the blockade. And meanwhile, the Francophone press, well, they're not taking any victims either. 3 of Le Journal's opinion pieces described it as a failure of leadership as well.
Now, many people are also drawing a parallel to when the national emergency powers were put in place the last time, 50 years ago, by Justin Trudeau's father.
Yeah, that's right. So the backstory of the cartoon we're about to see here in the Toronto Star by Theo Moudikis. What you need to know is that in October 1970, the Quebec Liberation Front, which Canada listed as a terrorist group, well, they kidnapped a government minister and a British diplomat and asked how far he would go to restore order. Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's dad, famously said, "Just watch me." So he then invoked the War Measures Act and arrested almost 500 people to quell the unrest. Well, in this cartoon, Justin Trudeau is imagining himself as part his father and part the Terminator, about to terminate the protests. But in the cartoonist Moudikis' mind, well, actually, he's thinking that, but it's wishful thinking.
Peter O'Brien, thank you so much for that look at what the papers have been saying about Canada's situation, both the state of emergency as well as the ongoing protests. Now, our number of the week is this one, 73 million. That is the dollar amount of a landmark settlement out of the United States. It comes nearly 10 years after gunman Adam Lanza used a Remington rifle to shoot dead 20 first graders and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School. The now bankrupt Remington Arms will tap into insurance funds to pay the historic amount to 9 families, marking the first time a gunmaker has agreed to a major settlement over a mass shooting in the States. But for one victim's mother, this kind of legal justice will never be enough.
Our legal system has given us some justice today. But as I told Josh Koskoff a few weeks ago, David and I will never have true justice. True justice would be our 15-year-old, healthy and standing next to us right now. But Benny will never be 15.
All right, let's go now to Honduras and the dramatic downfall of former President Juan Orlando Hernandez. He was arrested just weeks after he left office. The right-wing leader's detention coming after a Honduran judge ordered his arrest following a U.S. extradition request on drug trafficking and weapons charges. Yuka Roye reports.
It's a spectacular fall from grace for one of Central America's most powerful men who ruled Honduras for 8 years. Handcuffed and chained, Juan Orlando Hernandez is paraded to the press at a police headquarters.
Que está con la firmeza de hacer cumplir la ley en una forma minuciosa y precisa.
Hours before, as police surrounded his home, Hernandez posted an audio message on Twitter thanking his supporters.
No es un momento fácil.
It's not an easy moment. I do not wish it on anybody. But I am ready to collaborate and voluntarily present myself in order to face this situation and defend myself.
The arrest came less than a month after the former strongman was replaced by Xiomara Castro as Honduran president. She swept to victory in November's election, vowing to end what she called the country's narco-dictatorship and corruption. And the new government and the judiciary were quick to respond to a U.S. extradition request. Washington accuses Hernandez of facilitating drug trafficking and using the millions of dollars he received in bribes to fund his political campaigns. He has been on a U.S. blacklist since July, and his brother is already serving a life sentence in the United States. The move stands in stark contrast to the U.S. government's previous relationship with Hernandez. The right-wing politician, who came to prominence after a military coup in 2009, was long regarded as a vital U.S. ally in volatile Central America. Honduras' Supreme Court has appointed a judge to oversee the case, and it may take several months before any ruling is delivered.
Our picture, or rather video, of the week is a strange one. A flock of birds dropping dead mid-flight, all at the same time. The security footage is from the northern Mexican city of Chihuahua, showing close to 100 yellow-headed blackbirds who were migrating south for the winter. A local vet says the birds may have died after inhaling toxic fumes from a heater nearby or because of an overcharge from electricity cables. But the official reason for their death still remains a mystery. We'll head west now to California's Silicon Valley, the heart of the global tech industry. It's attracting a growing number of video game developers from France, where the sector has been booming in recent years. Our colleagues at France 2 sent this report with Claire Rush.
For this French engineer, Silicon Valley has been the land of opportunity.
I always dreamed of working in tech. San Francisco is like the mecca of tech. It's an amazing place to work. We're surrounded by Google, Facebook, Twitch. All these companies that everyone knows were created right here.
Alex Casasovici launched his first video game startup in France, but it failed to take off. He then moved to California, where he created an interactive app for Twitch users, attracting investors.
When I was in France, investors look for short-term gains. Here, investors care less about the short term. If they invest $1 in a company, they want to get $1,000 in return. They're looking for the chance to see a tenfold return or more on their investment in 10 years.
California is home to the developers of the world's most popular video games. The global gaming industry generates annual revenues topping $160 billion, far surpassing those of the film industry. The sector's rapid growth is fueling recruitment. That's how this French engineer arrived in Los Angeles. He works for one of the world's biggest gaming companies, designing the mobile app for Diablo. To get here, Quentin took night classes to learn how to code.
My father works for the Paris Public Transport Network, my mother for the Social Security. I've lived in public housing. It's not impossible. Look at what I've done. It's not as hard as it seems. There's no reason not to dream.
The coronavirus pandemic has further boosted the gaming industry, with some analysts predicting it will surpass $200 billion in value by next year.
Well, that wraps it up for this Inside the Americas. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again next time for all the news from north to south.